What's a decentralized exchange or DEX, and what's the difference between most of the so-called decentralized exchanges out there that are actually only non-custodial? Let's look at the details in today's video. Hey and welcome, Julian here, chairman of the DefiChain Foundation. We've received many questions on how the DEX, the Decentralized Exchange, works on DefiChain Foundation or on DefiChain. And what I would love to do, I would love to highlight the functionalities of this DEX, why it's completely decentralized, which is a very big difference to many other so-called decentralized exchanges out there that are only non-custodial. And so I would love to highlight this a bit and explain a bit some of the misconceptions. And obviously this applies to many of those decentralized exchanges out there that we're going to be using in these examples. So I'm going to switch to the iPad and we're going to do a bit of drawing here. So when we look at DEXs in general, we are going to have pretty much three different versions. We have centralized exchanges, let's call them CEX, centralized exchange. A very typical example would probably be Binance here. Then we have DEXs that are not really decentralized. What they are non-custodial. And a good example here would, for example, be Kyber, but there's many others that call themselves DEX, and I'm going to show you how you can actually spot DEXs that are not really DEXs. And then you have true decentralized exchanges, for example, DefiChain here. And again, there are a few others, but I'm going to use those as examples. So what does this actually here now mean, and what are the typical criteria? Now, what most people think of when we talk about DEX versus a CEX, they are talking about the private key. So do you control the private key, yes or no? And this is where most people fall for the trap that they think non-custodial exchanges are decentralized exchanges, but they're not. Why? Well, on Binance, as a CEX, it's very easy. Here, you don't control the private key. On Kyber, for example, on all non-custodial, by definition, you do control the private key. And on a true DEX, obviously as well, you actually control the private key. Now, the functionality on all those exchanges is the same. It's about exchanging from one asset into another. And in order to do this, you need some kind of interface. You need a website or you need some kind of interface. So that's the next question here. Interface. You need to be able to do this somewhere. And on a CEX, this is centralized. Obviously, this happens on a website. If this website is shut off, it doesn't work anymore. On pretty much all non-custodial exchanges, the same thing. These are centralized websites. You can just ask yourself, if wherever I access that exchange, can they shut this off? Can the government shut it off? What happens if it's shut off? Well, maybe there's different ways to access it again, but it would be really complicated. Now, I get it that they're going to tell you, well, look, it doesn't really matter. It's still stored on the blockchain because you control the private key, and you would just have to set something else up. True. But this would disrupt the entire system. And on a true DEX, what happens, for example, on DefiChain, you have your own wallet. So you download this, it's completely open source, you have access yourself, you control the private key yourself, everything is there. So it's completely decentralized. There's no one controlling this. Now, let's talk about the market making. And this is really relevant here because on a CEX, you have centralized market making and you have a centralized order book. Now again, if you have this centralized order book, you have an order book somehow. This order book can be manipulated, it can be stopped, there's all kinds of things. On non-custodial wallets, most of the time also, you have order books. They can be a bit different than maybe a centralized order book, but at the end you have one. And again, this is where there's a lot of challenges. Also, for example, if you look at Fork Delta, very typical DEX. It's not a DEX, it's non-custodial. You have order books on the website. And now this is actually where you're going to be thinking, yeah, well, does a DEX only have upsides? You will see there are certain challenges for a true decentralized exchange. And one of those is that in a DEX, the market making is pretty much done by the liquidity pools. And this is going to be a separate video, but this is actually going to highlight some of the difficulties that you have with a true DEX, or some requirements that you have with a true DEX. Yeah, so this is really important. The next thing are emergency stops. A true DEX, of course, has emergency stops. So this is something that you don't want to have, obviously, unless this is the stuff you want. If something goes wrong, you can undo this, right? Kyber, non-custodials, they all have these emergency plugs. Many times you don't hear about them, but if you actually read in most Ethereum DeFi, you suddenly hear, oh, the team pulled the plug, the team stopped something. How is this possible? Well, because it is centralized. On a true DEX, there is no emergency stop. So there's no way to stop this. Again, this can have upsides, can have downsides, but this is what true decentralization is. Now let's talk about regulation. Most DEXs should be regulated, and that's what they are. Non-custodial, they think they are not regulated, but they are gonna be. You will see, and that, in my opinion, is gonna cause a lot of headaches to a lot of DeFi, especially on Ethereum, because they think they're not regulated, but I totally think the regulator, especially in the US, is gonna go after them. Well, a true DEX cannot be regulated. Like, people can try, but there is no centralized party. Who are you gonna regulate? Yes, you can tell for example, the DefiChain Foundation to shut down. Sure, DefiChain Foundation can shut down. It can tell no one to work on DefiChain anymore. Sure, but in theory, the only thing you can, or you would have to do to stop the DEX, you would have to stop every single person that's participating in this, because it doesn't have those centralized parties. And that is a very, very important part in the entire system. So most people just don't realize that. And it's a humongous differentiator in this. Then listings. Obviously with Binance, that's well, highly centralized. On Kyber, same story. In most non-custodial exchanges, you have rules and you have decisions on who can actually list something. As soon as there's a decision, what can be listed on there, by definition, it cannot be decentralized because someone has the power. Sure, you can say, oh yeah, but this is done via the decentralized protocol. It's still not decentralized. At the end, on a true DEX, anything should be able to be listed. That's what true decentralization means. So on these things, it's also centralized. On a real DEX, like on DefiChain, it's decentralized. Now, from the features here, right, let's kind of mark this a bit. On the features here, obviously, you want to control your private key. The interface has to be decentralized. Regulation and the decentralized listing, I think these are very clear upsides. Now, you see me not marking two things as green. And this is because it has up and downsides. And we could also probably do the listings here as up and downsides. And I'm gonna give you a reason why in a second. Not everything that's decentralized is always better. I believe that decentralization is better in this sense, but there are drawdowns. And one of those is, for example, liquidity pool. A true decentralized exchange needs other parties to provide liquidity. Now, I'm gonna do this in a complete separate video. How does this actually work and how does this liquidity actually work? Because very few people explain that. But the drawdown of this is that it requires others to provide funds, and they need to be paid. They need to be paid somehow. Now, most DEXs do this either by issuing a coin. DefiChain, for example, for providing liquidity mining is you get DFI. DFI is actually the entire blockchain coin. Big difference to most other projects where you can liquidity mine, where you get, in my opinion, a worthless token. But at the end, you do need other parties. And that is a key concept, right? That is important. Yes, you can also do it just with the fees, but many times just fees is not enough. But yeah, that would be a great idea for the future. And then obviously emergency stops. I mean, there are parts or points where maybe emergency stops are helpful. In a true decentralized system, that's just not possible. But again, there are up and downsides in this. And if you want to rely on others, if you want to trust others, you want to use a DEX, like for example Binance. And if you really want to go decentralized, you want to control and own the stuff yourself, then the DEX is probably going to be a way better choice. And what I want to do here in this video, on the one hand, explain that most DEXs are actually non-custodial, and kind of highlight on how DefiChain is truly decentralized, with its up and downsides. And I think that's very, very important. Let me know in the comments down below if you feel that I have forgotten one of those points that is worth to be discussed. Let me know what you think about this. I'll link up DefiChain as well down below if you want to get involved. It's a really, really exciting project built around Bitcoin, bringing DeFi to Bitcoin. So yeah, links are down below. I hope this gives you a bit of an intro. We'll do a couple of other videos, for example, talking about the actual liquidity pool. We're going to talk about impermanent loss. And if you have any other questions around this topic, then just let me know in the comments. Happy to do extra videos on that. And obviously, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Thanks so much. See you around. Julian.